Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Andy Ricketts. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. And this week we'll be learning about the environment for charity events post-COVID, how things have changed and what can be done to get around new challenges for the events industry. And later in Charity Changed My Life, we'll hear how Kew Gardens' community horticulture programme helped one person as he turned around his life after experiencing homelessness.
But going straight into this week's main discussion, I'd like to set the scene by playing a short clip from an interview recorded a couple of months ago with Richard Angel, Chief Executive of the Terence Higgins Trust.
You'll know big events post-COVID are really challenging for charities. The cost base has gone up exponentially. Many of the people in the kind of hospitality sector are still paying back COVID debts. They're unable to provide charities with even mates rates, let alone what we used to get of kind of donated venues in the past. So events are always really challenging for charities now, but have been a key part of how we fundraised before. Sometimes it's been that event that's given people the opportunity to make their donation, but it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we're bringing in more money than we're spending on those events, and that's been really challenging post-COVID.
So that was Richard Angel from the Terence Higgins Trust speaking to me at the Chelsea Flower Show back in May. And I'm going to hazard a guess that this experience will ring true for a lot of charities. So in the next 20 minutes or so, we're keen to get some ideas about how managers can not only break even, but ensure they're meeting the fundraising targets that are needed to deliver their services and, of course, make organising these big events worthwhile. And we're delighted to have two highly qualified guests joining us for this discussion. First up is Bekki Wilkins, Special Events Manager at the Willow Foundation, which puts on two major events a year, the Willow Ball and the London Football Awards, and a collection of smaller ones. Hi, Bekki.
Hi.
And also joining us is Sam Dimond, Director of the events company Spotlight Sound. Bekki and Sam work together on the Willow Ball. Hello, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
So, Bekki, in that clip, Richard Angel mentioned fundraising, which is obviously the main reason that many charities organise big events. Is fundraising the main aim of the Willow Foundation's large events, or has there been a change in terms of why you're doing them since COVID?
No, absolutely. That is our main aim through all of our events, our large events and our small ones. It's a mixture of fundraising. We are fundraisers and also gaining new audiences. So our aims haven't changed since COVID, thankfully, but we just sort of have to diversify slightly with what we're doing with our events.
And have you also been struggling with your events since the pandemic? Those challenges of not getting discounts from venues and suppliers and so on, is that what you've experienced too?
Yeah, definitely. We understand that costs have gone up and appreciate that. We can pass like a proportion on to our guests, but ultimately not all of it. So it does affect our ROI on all of our events and everything that we do. It's not just putting on events, it's everything that goes with it really that has made a real impact since COVID on us.
And can you give us some examples, Sam, of what has changed for charity events companies since COVID?
Sure. Yeah, as an event production company for charities, the costs, as Bekki say, have really changed since COVID. We've had to really change what we've done for events, and we've had to look at different ways of producing events, hybrid virtual events, which has meant new equipment, new staff training, lots more costs that have been considered. And those are things that have really only come about since COVID.
And Bekki, from a charity perspective, what kind of things have you seen becoming more expensive and how have you tried to kind of mitigate those in terms of your fundraising activities?
Everything has been more expensive. I don't think there's one thing that I can say that's not. Venues and catering is one of our biggest expenses for our larger events. It's really difficult to sort of try and lower the budget. We now have to look at what is essential. Do we have to have name places on each table? Could we save a couple of £100 by not doing those? Could we do them in-house rather than get an external supplier to write them? Every time we do an event, we are sort of talking about, can we do them outside of London to bring the costs down? So venues in London are so much more expensive. Looking at sort of how that might be possible for some of our events. And then utilising our suppliers and leaning on the people that we've got relationships with to see how they can help us. But it's tricky. It's really hard. And every single event that we look at putting on, there is so much background and so much research into it, and actually, is this going to be a viable fundraising event for us? Because at the end of the day, it's all about making the money for our beneficiaries.
So you're not only seeing an increase in the actual financial cost, but presumably in the time that it's taking on the charity side to actually organise the event, because you're having to spend more time considering those costs and how you're going to best deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more to consider now. It's not as easy as saying, right, let's try this event and see if it works. It is a real case of sitting down. It has to go up through our trustees and to our finance director, and just to make sure that we are on the right page and given the best outcome we can. So yeah, it's definitely a lot more challenging.
But then making sure that you are keeping your events as stellar and high quality as they need to be to meet the targets that you want to and attract the people that are going to raise visibility for your cause, as one example, and also just meet those fundraising targets.
Absolutely. We can't drop in our delivery, our quality, what guests get. We are having to pass on higher ticket prices, so therefore people then expect more, but we're having to try and reduce the cost of what we're spending. So yeah, it's a very fine line between exceeding guest expectations and trying to save money on every part of our event.
And are you seeing a corresponding change in appetite from potential punters and fundraising individuals for those events themselves? And how is that changing in terms of the different events that you might be putting on when you consider hybrid and other kind of events that you might stage?
We're noticing sort of ticket sales can be slower than they have been pre-COVID. There is definitely a reluctance to spend. We used to have sort of big corporate companies doing corporate hospitality and buying tables at our London Football Awards event especially, and that is no longer happening as much because a lot of companies aren't able to provide corporate hospitality. So we are noticing that being more of a struggle. Sponsorship as well. It's a lot trickier nowadays to get sponsorship or any gifts in kind from anybody because people don't have the spare cash to be able to spend on charity and charity events, which is a shame. And that's definitely harder.
And Sam, from your perspective as a event production company, have you seen a wider trend, perhaps also into the corporate sector, of people organising hybrid events and expressing a real need to cut costs and to reduce their overall event budget? Is that a problem? And also, what are the main cost-cutting measures that you advise people to take?
Yes, I mean, we've definitely seen since COVID, we had a huge uptake in events, absolutely rocketed after we was, locked down for so long. And it certainly has calmed down. And I think been a bit of a downturn now. We're definitely seeing less events booking across the board, whether that's corporate or charities. So people are doing less. On the corporate side, we do see now the companies that would have been doing annual staff parties, dinners, award shows, they're cutting right back on those because they're making redundancies. Businesses are struggling, they're cutting staff, so they can't be doing these types of shows. So it is affecting both sectors. We try and be as open and honest with who we're working with about what we can and can't do. We try and have a really open discussion about budget as early on as possible so that we can really understand what their goals for the event are and what that budget is and how we can really best utilize that and make sure they're going to get the best outcome for their events. But there certainly has been a downturn with the cost of living crisis that we've seen in the last couple of years. It's been slower to impact the corporate market. I think it's affected charities a lot quicker. It's been a lot more instant. Corporates now, we're only just starting to see a bit of a downturn in that business. But these things come around in circles. They go around in cycles. They'll come back again. And in-person events are super important. They're so important for corporate and for charities. Hybrid and virtual events absolutely have their place, but they don't replace the in-person events. And we need to be getting back to those as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And in terms of how to respond to the increased costs and the lower budgets for organisations that still want to have in-person events, like what are the big cost-cutting measures? I know this is a really generalised question and therefore it might be difficult to respond, but are there any obvious things that people are cutting back on?
Yeah, I mean, I think events are getting smaller. We're seeing more affordable venues, smaller in-person events. They're really having to focus on the attendees, making sure that people that are there are really going to get the best from the event. So looking at different spaces, recording the events and the hybrid is really good. It gives you some extra content. It's stuff that you can repurpose in the future. So there's things that you can do to make that one event last longer. So there are a couple of key things that you can really do to help. You do need to be getting plenty of competitive quotes from different suppliers across the board and trying to compare like for like, making sure you're getting good value for money.
And on that supplier issue, I know that venues often have their own in-house teams or preferred suppliers that they encourage their clients to use. Obviously, that's a problem for you as a production company, I can imagine, and you and Bekki have a long-standing relationship organising the Willow Ball together. How can you get around those stipulations from venues to make sure that both client and production company has the team that they want?
So different venues have different arrangements, and for some venues it can be really tricky to work at if they've got an exclusive arrangement, or it's difficult for the client, the event manager, to put on an event using the people that they want to use. We're happy to work with in-house and preferred suppliers. They know their venues and they know their people on site. We know the client and how they want to work and how they want the best outcome for their event. So we try to work with the venues and with the suppliers to get the best blend of each supplier, really, and how ultimately we're going to get the best outcome for the client and for the event.
From a sort of a client perspective, it is one of the challenging things about venue finding, and it is a real consideration for us. Often it does price us out of a venue because a lot of the time their production teams will be more expensive. So there has been occasion where we haven't been able to use a venue we wanted because we've been tied into their production teams and caterers as well, that sort of thing. So it is a real consideration and a tricky one to navigate when booking and looking at venues for our larger events.
But then on the other side, you want to make sure that you have the team that you know and trust to deliver the type of event that you want and that will ultimately be a success. So how can charities organising big events cultivate long-term relationships with production teams? How can you make that work?
So Sam and I have worked together for the last 6 years or so when I was at my previous charity, and I think part of the key is both being open and honest. So from my perspective, being open and saying, okay, this is what I want to achieve, this is the event, and then ultimately Sam saying, you know, you haven't got the budget for that, why don't you look at doing X, Y and Z? That's really important to me, and not having a supplier who overpromises and underdelivers. So that's sort of a main thing. Asking their opinion as well, that they're obviously the experts in the field, so it's really important to be saying, okay, you know, I've got this space, this is the idea, and I guess talking to them about the charity, so really putting them on our story, getting them involved with who we are, why we do this, and what we're doing it for. And I think that builds a real emotional connection for the supplier and for the charity as well, which goes a long way to them wanting to support. If they understand what you do and why you do it, it really goes a long way.
And Bekki, have you got any suggestions for smaller charities that maybe aren't really doing much in the way of events, in terms of things that they might be able to do or events they might be able to consider staging that maybe won't necessarily break the bank or cause an enormous administrative headache, but will actually bring in some useful funds for that charity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, stay out of London is the first one. You know, have a look at venues outside of London because they will be a lot cheaper if you're looking at doing in person, you know, a ball or something like that. Virtual events are a brilliant way. We're running a virtual event at the moment. It's the first time that Willow has done a virtual event, and it's going really well. It's set up on Facebook. It's a brilliant way of making money without a lot of outlay. Just sort of staff costs and some T-shirts is always spending on this. And then look at also, if you've got suppliers you work with, see if you can do any contra deals. So say, you know, we can offer you a table at our event in return for a free whatever, whether it's, you know, a part of production or flowers for the centerpieces or something like that. Some companies are very keen for contra deals. And again, sponsorship, speak to people, how can they support you? Corporates in sponsorship, but also there's no harm in asking your suppliers to see if they would be happy to take a percentage off in return for a sponsorship. Gifts in kind as well. What can companies give you for an advert in the programme or a mention at the event too?
And Sam, is there anything that you could add to that in terms of, as a production company director yourself, what can charities offer companies that would be compelling enough for them to take on a job at a lower cost?
Yes, I think really understanding the charity and buying into their story actually and understanding what they do is a really good point. We work with small local charities, we work with large national charities. And actually, when you're really understand the organisation and what they do, it's much easier to relate and understand the pain and pressure points that they've got when they're organising an event. That helps us if we can really work with them to offer any extra discount, if there is some benefit in kind, if it's an event that has got an attractive audience, that there is some sort of sponsorship or some advertising opportunity as well. We see this with some charities where we'll provide a discount for our services, but there's an advertising element to what they can give to us. So there's definitely some contra deals and some back and forwards that you can do with suppliers, and just being open to sort of get a bit creative with that, really.
Is there a particular contra deal or example of a benefit in kind that really stands out in your mind from the past? Maybe something unusual that you hadn't thought of before, but turned out to be a really compelling offer?
We do have a regular contra deal that we do every year. We have a PR agency who will do our PR for an event in return for a table at an event. And again, similar with sort of a graphics designer company. And as Sam said, it's about being creative. I haven't got any amazing stories about that, but being creative and also just not being afraid to ask, because sometimes they are absolutely more than willing, and it's the only way they can give to a charity without giving cash, because companies aren't able to do that as much anymore. So it is their sort of their charity side done, in return for service.
We do get a lot of charity requests. Like, we'll get a lot of requests for, can we put on this show? Can we do this? Can we do that free of charge? And we get a lot of blunt sort of free of charge requests. And I think if you can make yourself stand out a little bit, not asking for a blanket, can we have all this for free, but some sort of contra deal or some sort of way that we can actually build a relationship and work together. That way, from our side of it, we've got some longevity, and we're going to build a longer term relationship with you, and we're going to grow with you, and we're going to make your event successful and work into the future. It is really difficult for charities, and there's lots and lots of charities out there doing lots and lots of good work, and we try and work with and help as many as possible. But you don't want to approach suppliers with blanket, can you do this for free?
No, particularly not right at the moment when companies are struggling as much as charities are in many cases.
Yeah, exactly.
I was recently hearing a group of event managers talking about the challenges they see coming further down the track. And one of the considerations that came up was around carbon neutrality, and whether at some stage there might be pressure or even legislation on events becoming carbon neutral as a basic requirement. Bekki, are you seeing any pressure in that area? And if so, what sort of changes are you making and or expecting to make?
Yeah, there's definitely more pressure. Every event we do now, we sit and we look at how we can make it more sustainable. And it's the small changes. It's things like we don't do our registration on printed paper anymore and tick people in. We do it on iPads or laptops. At some of our challenge events, we try and steer clear of plastic bottles and change them to cans or whatever. So yeah, we are absolutely trying to make changes. We look at doing this, and this is going back to sort of cost a little bit as well, and that changing from plastic bottles to cans or something, there is a cost increase in that. So it all knocks on again, and we will obviously, we persevere and we do it, but that does have a cost implication to us.
How about you, Sam? Are you seeing more requests for environmental sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing it in general across everything that we deal with as a business. We've done a lot of work in the last sort of 12 months. We've signed up to an SME climate hub where we're committing to reducing our environmental impact. A lot of people are interested in this work and reducing their environmental impact. So it is really key to make sure we're doing this for events. I think when you look at an event from an outside, if it's a big gathering of people, you've got lots of people coming together, lots of movement, lots of waste, and that's a big environmental impact. And I think people can see that quite quickly and think that this is a problem. So we put quite a lot of time into waste reduction, just making sure how we're working and the way we're doing things. We've cut that right down in terms of the waste that we produce, and energy efficiency as well. There's a lot of technology within events now to allow us to be a lot more efficient with what we do. So for events, whether we're looking at more green energy instead of using, say, diesel generators for outdoor events, it might be that we're using LED technology rather than sort of old halogen lighting effects. So as a business, obviously we want to be as environmentally friendly as possible, and we're doing a lot of work towards that, but that costs money, and ultimately we want to do the right thing, but doing the right thing is costing businesses more and more money, and that obviously has to be passed on.
So yet another challenge associated with putting on events coming from the cost side of things when it's already very challenging. But There isn't need to be totally down, right? Sam, I think there is some cause for optimism.
I think one of your questions said, what for smaller charities or smaller event managers, what can you do? And I think the thing is to just get started. Don't be afraid. Do go out there and just organise something small. It can take a while for events to become profitable, but if you can set a plan and you can put some budget aside to get out there and to do something, then you'll be moving forward.
Great. Well, so much food for thought there. Bekki from the Willow Foundation and Sam from Spotlight Sound, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Now we move on to Charity Changed My Life, in which we bring you the stories of people whose lives have been transformed for the better thanks to the work of charities. And this week we hear from Jerry, who joined a community horticulture programme at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, where he has volunteered now for the past 3 years.
In 2015, I was made homeless, and I was homeless for 6 years. Being homeless, I was, out on the streets on my own, doing lots of, bad things that I do have a regret in doing them, but when you're put in that situation, it's very hard not to do, things like drugs and things and drinking and whatever else. So coming to Kew Gardens sort of gave me a bit of, inspiration to try and turn my life around. So probably worked here for nearly 3 years now as a volunteer. First of all, we did a 3-week horticultural programme, and I was given a chance to come and work at the allotment. I've got a bit of knowledge in horticulture, and I love sort of seeing things grow from sort of scratch. That the seed then turns into a little bit of a plant, and then obviously repot it and to see what comes out of it, and then obviously then it's given back to the community. So this is brilliant. I think that you can be part of that and just meeting other people, getting you to socialise again. It is a really good place, and it's a safe space, It's keeping my mind occupied, and thinking of good things that are coming ahead, and just to be in a good safe space around people that have, that they've had different challenges in their lives. It's a big highlight of the week, for me. Can't wait for every Wednesday to come, basically, My mum used to work here at Kew Gardens, and for me to get a chance to come and work at Kew is just amazing, because my mum was a big part, for me. I've missed my mum dearly, but knowing that I've come back to Kew and been given a chance to come here, it just gives me a bit of a good feeling sort of thing to know that I'm here. So.
That was Jerry telling us about how the community horticulture programme at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew helped change his life for the better. And if you'd like your organisation to be featured in Charity Changed My Life, we'd love to hear from you. All it takes is a short voice message from someone who has benefited from your services. You can find details of how to get in touch in the show notes to this and every episode.
And that's it for this week. We'll be back next week to find out about lived experience in the charity sector. As ever, if you'd like to get in touch with us or give some feedback, you can find the link to a short listener survey in the show notes to this episode. But for now, thank you to our guests, Bekki and Sam. Our producer is Nav Pal.